Welcome to your personalized deep dive. This time, we're diving into the world of body language, and specifically, we're going to zero in on arms and hands.
Fascinating area, isn't it?
It is. It seems like you're really interested in getting past those basic interpretations, really understanding those silent signals.
Hmm.
And that's where Joe Navarro comes in, right?
Absolutely.
He's a former FBI agent, and in his book, What Everybody is Saying, he really digs deep into how, arm and hand behaviors can reveal so much about a person.
Oh, it's incredible what you can pick up on.
Yeah, from comfort levels to, even signs of deception.
It's like we're cracking a secret code of human interaction.
Yeah.
And the sources you provided, they really go deep,
Yeah,
exploring those nuances and complexities that most people just completely miss.
totally. Yeah. So where should we even begin? I was so struck by the section on arm behavior
Okay.
and just how much it can reveal, especially when someone's feeling, vulnerable.
Absolutely. In Navarro, he has this really powerful example of a little girl at a swimming pool whose arm movements completely froze around her abuser.
Oh, wow.
And it's just a stark illustration of how our limbic system, that's the part of our brain that controls those survival responses, right?
Right.
It just takes over in threatening situations.
Wow.
It's a subconscious reaction, a way of kind of minimizing the threat
Wow.
by making yourself appear smaller, less noticeable.
It's heartbreaking, but, as you said, it just shows how important it is to pay attention to those little cues.
Right.
Not just in children,
Oh, absolutely.
in adults, too.
Yeah.
Navarro talks about how in adults, restricted arm movements can signal discomfort or even like a shift in the dynamics of a relationship.
Precisely. And just think about a woman clutching her handbag tightly, right?
Mm-hmm.
It might seem like a simple action,
Right.
but underneath that, it could be signaling underlying anxiety, a sense of vulnerability in that environment.
Hmm.
Or think about how people cross their arms during a disagreement. Right.
Yeah, totally.
It's like creating a physical barrier,
Yeah.
signaling, hey, I'm defensive, I'm resisting your viewpoint.
Yeah.
It's fascinating.
And then there's the flip side, right?
Right.
Open, expansive arm movements. Like when you greet a close friend with a hug,
Yes.
or when someone's gesturing broadly during a really engaging conversation.
Exactly. Those open arm gestures, they convey that sense of welcome, warmth, connection.
Yes.
It's like a nonverbal way of saying, hey, I'm comfortable with you, or I'm open to what you have to say.
I love that.
And it's amazing how just that simple shift in arm position can totally change the entire tone of an interaction.
It makes you realize how much we're communicating without even thinking about it.
Oh, absolutely.
So, okay, arms, they give us that overall emotional temperature.
Mm-hmm.
But what about hands?
Okay.
They seem like they could be even more expressive.
Hands are fascinating.
Yeah.
They're so versatile, capable of conveying such a range of emotions and tensions.
Yeah.
Navarro calls them mini billboards for our thoughts.
I love that.
It's a really fitting analogy.
Yeah.
Like, consider the gesture of steepling, where someone touches their fingertips together.
Oh, yeah. I was so intrigued by that one. It seems so simple, but Navarro says it can be a sign of confidence, authority.
It certainly can be, especially when the steeple is held high, like right in front of the chest.
Mm-hmm.
But we always have to remember context, and those individual variations are huge, right?
Yeah.
A lower steeple held near the lap, that might signal more contemplation,
Interesting.
thoughtfulness,
Mm-hmm.
rather than that outright confidence.
Right.
And some people, honestly, they just steeple their fingers habitually without any conscious intent at all.
Right.
So it's not a foolproof sign,
Right.
but it's definitely something to watch for, especially in combination with other cues.
Okay, so not foolproof, but worth noting.
Yeah.
What about other hand gestures, like wringing your hands or like fidgeting with jewelry?
Yeah.
Those seem like pretty clear signs of anxiety.
They often are.
Yeah.
These types of gestures, what Navarro calls adapters, they're ways of self-soothing or releasing that nervous energy.
Makes sense.
And they can indicate stress, boredom, even deception, depending on the context.
Mm-hmm.
Imagine someone being interviewed for a job,
Right.
and they start like fidgeting excessively, touching their face repeatedly.
Oh, yeah.
It could be a sign that they're anxious,
Yeah.
or maybe they're trying to conceal something.
Right.
It's all about that context.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah.
That makes sense.
Wow.
And you mentioned deception.
Yeah.
It seems like jurors would be very attuned to hand gestures in a courtroom.
Oh, they are.
Yeah.
Navarro talks about how open, palms up gestures, they convey honesty,
Mhm.
sincerity,
Mhm.
while
Mhm.
pointing fingers can come across as aggressive, accusatory.
Right.
Lawyers often coach their clients on using those open hand gestures to build rapport with the jury.
It's fascinating how these seemingly small gestures can have such a huge impact on how we're perceived,
It really is.
both consciously and unconsciously.
Absolutely. And it highlights how important it is to be mindful of our own body language,
Hmm.
especially in situations where we want to make a good impression or build trust with others.
Yeah, absolutely.
So important.
It is, yeah. So we've talked about arms, we've talked about hands,
Right.
but I'm kind of curious about what our legs and feet might be telling us. I
Okay.
feel like those are often overlooked.
Yeah, they do often get less attention,
Yeah,
but that's part of what makes them so interesting.
right.
Navarro calls them the most honest part of the body because they're less subject to that conscious control.
Oh,
So
interesting.
they can really be a giveaway,
Yes.
especially when someone's trying to manage their facial expressions or their hand gestures, right?
Right, right. So what should we be looking for? Like, let's say if someone keeps pointing their feet towards the exit during a conversation,
Okay.
does that mean like they're just desperate to leave?
Well, it could be a sign of that,
Hmm.
especially if it's accompanied by other cues like leaning away or checking their watch.
Right,
But again, context is everything.
right,
Maybe they're just uncomfortable with how their chair is positioned, or maybe they've got another appointment that they're running late for.
right, right. So we need to look for those patterns, those clusters of behavior,
Exactly.
not just like one-off gestures.
Yeah.
What about those little subconscious movements like tapping your feet or jiggling your legs? I know I do that sometimes when I'm like impatient or anxious.
Oh, yeah. Navarro, he refers to those as happy feet,
Happy feet, I like that.
and they're classic indicators of, that nervous energy, that inner restlessness.
Oh,
It's
yeah.
like our bodies are trying to find an outlet for all that pent-up tension.
Yeah, so if I'm giving a presentation and someone in the audience has got a serious case of happy feet,
Mhm.
maybe that's a sign that I need to, liven things up a bit.
It's a possibility.
Yeah.
Or maybe
But
they're just really processing the information, and their feet are just unconsciously reflecting that mental activity.
yeah, that's true.
It's all about being observant and considering all those possible interpretations.
So happy feet could be impatience, anxiety, or even just like engagement, mental engagement.
Exactly.
What about leg crossing?
Okay.
I heard that can be a sign of defensiveness, resistance.
It can be,
Yeah.
especially if the leg cross is tight, with the ankles locked or the feet kind of tucked in.
Mm-hmm.
It's almost like the person is creating that physical barrier,
Right.
protecting themselves from the interaction.
But I also cross my legs sometimes just because it's comfortable.
Sure.
So how do we differentiate between like a casual leg cross and one that's signaling something more?
You got to pay attention to the other nonverbal cues, right?
Okay.
Is the person leaning back, relaxed,
Mm-hmm.
or are they tense, hunched over? Are they making eye contact, engaging in the conversation? Or are they withdrawn, looking away?
Right.
It's about seeing that whole picture, not just focusing on one isolated gesture.
So if someone suddenly crosses their legs tightly during a particular topic or question,
Right.
maybe that's a sign that they're feeling uncomfortable, defensive about that specific subject.
Exactly. It's a subtle shift in behavior,
Hmm.
but it can reveal so much about their inner state, even if they're trying to maintain that composed exterior.
It's amazing how much information is hidden in plain sight.
It really is,
If we just like know what to look for.
if we know what to look for.
Navarro mentions some other leg and foot movements,
Okay.
like the knee clasp and leg splaying.
Yeah.
Can you explain what those are and what they might signify?
Sure. So the knee clasp is where someone's sitting with their hands clasped around one knee.
Okay.
It often indicates anticipation or anxiety.
Mm-hmm.
It's like they're holding themselves back, bracing for something potentially challenging or stressful.
Like waiting for a job interview.
Exactly. Or before giving a presentation.
Yeah, yeah. Okay.
It's a subtle cue, but it reveals a lot about their internal state,
Mm.
even if they're trying to appear calm and collected on the outside.
And what about leg splaying? That sounds a bit more assertive.
It can be.
Yeah.
Leg splaying is when someone sits with their legs wide apart, taking up more space.
Mm.
And it can be a display of dominance, a need for control.
Okay.
You often see it in people who are trying to assert their authority or establish their presence in a room.
Yeah, I could see that, like in a negotiation or a competitive setting.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
But again, context is crucial.
Right.
Some people naturally sit with their legs wider apart just because it's more comfortable.
Right, just their natural posture.
Exactly. It's about observing their baseline behavior
Right.
and looking for deviations that might signal a change in their emotional state or intentions.
This is all so fascinating. I'm really starting to see how much we communicate without even realizing it.
That's the beauty of learning about body language, right?
Mm.
It opens up a whole new level of awareness and understanding, not just of others, but of ourselves as well.
Okay, we've covered arms, hands, legs, feet.
hmm
Is there any part of the body left to explore?
Well, we can't forget about the torso.
The torso.
Yeah,
Okay.
the core of our body, right? And it's a really powerful communicator of emotions and intentions.
Huh. I have to admit, I've never really thought about the torso as a source of nonverbal cues.
It's often overlooked,
Yeah.
but it plays a crucial role in how we present ourselves to the world.
So what kinds of things should we be looking for?
Well, there are several key areas to pay attention to: posture, chest movements, and even the way someone holds their abdomen.
Okay.
For example, a puffed up chest, especially when combined with a wide stance, can be a sign of dominance or aggression.
Oh, like they're trying to make themselves appear larger and more intimidating?
Exactly, like a puffer fish trying to ward off a predator.
Right, right.
It's a classic power move,
Yeah.
often seen in those competitive or confrontational situations.
Uh-huh.
But it can also be a sign of insecurity,
Oh,
a
interesting.
way of overcompensating for feelings of vulnerability.
So it could go either way.
It could, yeah.
On the other hand, a slumped or hunched posture with the shoulders rounded and the head down, that's a pretty clear sign of low confidence or defeat, right?
It can be.
Yeah?
It often indicates that someone's feeling sad, discouraged, withdrawn.
Mm-hmm.
But it's important to note that posture can also be influenced by physical factors like fatigue or pain.
Right. So, as always, we need to consider the context.
Oh,
Look for other nonverbal cues that might confirm or contradict our initial interpretation.
exactly.
What about chest movements?
Okay.
I've noticed that people sometimes puff out their chests or hold their breath when they're stressed or anxious.
That's a common physiological response to stress.
Right.
When we're feeling threatened, our bodies go into that fight or flight mode.
Right.
And part of that response is increased respiration.
Mm-hmm.
So you might see someone taking shallow breaths, holding their chest rigid, or even breathing heavily as a way of coping with that anxiety or fear.
Like their body's preparing for action,
Exactly.
even if they're outwardly trying to appear calm and composed.
Precisely. And those chest movements can be really valuable cues for recognizing when someone is feeling overwhelmed or out of their comfort zone.
Okay. So we've got posture, chest movements.
Uh-huh.
What about the abdomen? I've never really thought about that as a source of nonverbal cues.
It's often overlooked, but the way someone holds their abdomen can reveal a lot about their emotional state.
Really?
For example, someone who's feeling insecure or anxious might protectively cover their abdomen with their arms or hands.
Oh, like they're instinctively trying to shield that most vulnerable area.
Exactly.
Interesting.
It's a self-soothing gesture that often occurs unconsciously in response to stress or discomfort.
So what about the opposite, like a relaxed or exposed abdomen? Does that signal confidence or comfort?
It can.
Okay.
When someone's feeling relaxed and at ease, their abdominal muscles tend to be less tense,
Mm-hmm.
and they're more likely to stand or sit in a way that exposes their torso.
It's like they're literally opening themselves up,
It's also
both physically and emotionally.
Precisely. It's a sign of vulnerability. Also of trust and confidence.
Okay, so posture, chest movements, abdominal cues.
Yeah.
What's the overall takeaway when it comes to reading the nonverbal language of the torso?
I think the key is to pay attention to how aligned or misaligned someone's torso is with their words and actions.
Okay.
Are they projecting confidence, openness,
Mm-hmm.
or are they subtly signaling discomfort, anxiety, maybe even deception?
And remember, those signals aren't always obvious or easy to interpret.
Definitely not.
Takes practice, observation, and a willingness to consider different perspectives.
Absolutely. And with that practice comes a deeper understanding of ourselves and others, a
Mm-hmm.
more nuanced appreciation for the complexity of human communication,
Right.
and the ability to navigate our social world with greater confidence and empathy.
Okay, we've covered a lot of ground today, from arms and hands to legs and feet, and now the torso. Before we move on to one of the most fascinating and perhaps most misunderstood aspects of nonverbal communication deception, let's take a moment to recap some of the key takeaways from what we've learned so far.
Okay, sounds good.
So a quick rundown. First, when it comes to arm behavior, watch for openness versus restriction.
Mm-hmm.
Open, expansive movements, they signal warmth, welcome, confidence.
Mm-hmm.
while restricted movements can suggest discomfort, anxiety, or even fear.
Right.
Second, hand gestures, they're like mini billboards for our thoughts.
Love that analogy.
Steepling conveys confidence and authority, while nervous gestures often betray stress or insecurity.
Yeah.
But remember, context is crucial.
Always.
A seemingly nervous gesture might just be a habit, a way of releasing energy.
Mhm.
Third, legs and feet, often overlooked, but can be incredibly revealing.
Mhm.
Happy feet signal restlessness, impatience, or a desire to escape.
Right.
Leg crossing can indicate defensiveness or closed-mindedness,
Uh-huh.
but again, context is key. And fourth, the torso, a powerful communicator of emotions and intentions.
Powerful.
A puffed-up chest can signal dominance or insecurity, while a slumped posture often indicates low confidence or defeat.
Right.
Pay attention to how someone holds their abdomen,
Yeah.
as a protective gesture can suggest anxiety or discomfort.
It can.
And remember, body language is just one piece of the puzzle.
One piece.
It's important to consider other factors like the person's personality, the situation, and your own intuition.
Absolutely.
Okay, with those key points in mind, let's move on to one of the most intriguing and perhaps most challenging aspects of nonverbal communication deception.
Okay, let's do it.
Can we really tell if someone's lying just by observing their body language?
And that's a question that's fascinated people for centuries, and it's one that we'll explore in depth in the next part of our deep dive.
Okay.
But I want to emphasize from the outset that detecting deception is incredibly complex, and there's no single tell that'll guarantee you've caught someone in a lie.
So if there's no magic formula for spotting a liar, where do we even begin? How can we approach this idea of detecting deception without, jumping to conclusions?
Well, Navarro, he emphasizes that it's not about looking for one specific tell.
Okay.
It's about observing those clusters of behaviors that deviate from a person's baseline.
Right.
We need to understand how someone typically acts when they're relaxed, being truthful, so we can notice those shifts.
So it's like creating a mental profile,
Exactly.
their normal behavior, their usual way of moving, expressing themselves.
Exactly. Their typical posture, their facial expressions, their hand gestures, even their tone of voice and pace of speech, all of those things contribute to that baseline.
Right.
And once we have that baseline established, then we can start to look for subtle changes
Okay.
that might indicate discomfort, stress, a possible attempt to conceal the truth.
Okay, so we're looking for those deviations from the baseline.
Right.
What are some of the key areas that Navarro highlights as potential indicators of deception?
He focuses on three main categories: pacifying behaviors, synchrony, and emphasis, or rather a lack thereof.
Okay, let's start with pacifying behaviors.
Okay.
Those are things like touching the face, rubbing the neck, or fidgeting with objects, right?
Yeah.
Things that people do to sort of soothe themselves when they're feeling uncomfortable.
Precisely. And while these behaviors don't automatically mean someone's lying, they can definitely suggest that something is making them uneasy,
Right.
which could be a sign that they're trying to hide something.
So if someone suddenly starts touching their face or playing with their hair more than usual, especially when asked a specific question,
Mm-hmm.
it might be worth paying closer attention.
Exactly. It's about noticing those subtle shifts
Mhm.
and considering them in context.
Yeah.
Are they suddenly fidgeting when asked about a particular topic? Is their voice getting higher? Are they avoiding eye contact?
Right.
These can all be pieces of the puzzle.
Okay, so we've got pacifying behaviors.
Right.
What about synchrony? What does that mean in terms of detecting deception?
Synchrony is about observing the alignment between someone's words, their body language, and the overall situation.
Okay.
When someone is being truthful, there's usually a natural flow and consistency to their communication.
Right.
Their words, their gestures, their emotions, it all seems to line up.
Well, when someone's lying, that synchrony starts to break down.
Exactly. You might see a mismatch between their words and their facial expressions, or their body language might contradict what they're saying.
Mm-hmm.
For example, someone might deny any involvement in a situation, but their posture becomes closed off, their voice gets higher, and they avoid making eye contact.
It's like their body is betraying their words,
Yes.
sending out these mixed signals that something isn't quite right.
That's a great way to put it.
Yeah.
It's like their conscious mind is trying to control the narrative, but their subconscious is leaking out those tiny hints of truth through their nonverbal behavior.
Fascinating. Okay, and the third area Navarro mentions is emphasis, or a lack of emphasis.
Right.
Can you elaborate on that?
Well, think about how we naturally express ourselves when we're truly enthusiastic or passionate about something.
Yeah.
Our voices become more animated, our hand gestures become more expansive, Our facial expressions light up.
But when someone's lying, they often hold back. They like that natural energy and emphasis.
Exactly. It's like their limbic system, the part of the brain that drives our emotions. It's not fully on board with the lie.
Right.
So their body language becomes subdued, their gestures become less animated, their voice might become monotone or flat.
So if someone is telling a story that should be emotionally charged, but their body language is strangely muted, it could be a sign that they're not being entirely truthful.
Precisely. Again, it's about looking for that disconnect between what they're saying and how their body is reacting.
This is all so insightful, but it also highlights the importance of avoiding those common pitfalls, right? When trying to read body language.
Absolutely.
We don't want to misinterpret a cue or jump to conclusions based on a single gesture.
One of the biggest mistakes people make is focusing too much on a single tell, like someone touching their nose or crossing their arms.
Right.
As we've discussed, body language is much more complex than that.
Right.
We need to consider the entire context, look for clusters of behaviors that deviate from the baseline, and be aware of cultural differences in interpretation.
And it's important to remember that not everyone who displays signs of discomfort or stress is automatically lying.
Oh, absolutely.
People can be nervous for all sorts of reasons.
Of course.
And those nerves don't necessarily mean they're being deceptive.
Exactly. Maybe they're just shy, introverted, or maybe they're having a bad day.
Right.
It's about taking all of those factors into account and using our judgment.
And perhaps the most crucial point is to remember that this knowledge should be used ethically and with sensitivity, not to manipulate or exploit others.
Couldn't agree more.
The goal of understanding body language is to enhance communication, build stronger relationships, and navigate our social world with greater empathy and awareness. This deep dive has been incredibly eye-opening.
It has been fascinating.
I feel like I've gained a whole new perspective on human interaction, learning to see those subtle cues that I never even noticed before.
It's been a pleasure exploring this fascinating topic with you. And remember, the learning never stops.
Yeah.
The more you observe, practice, and reflect on the nonverbal cues around you, the more skilled you'll become at decoding that silent language of the body.
And you never know, maybe we'll even discover some new insights that Joe Navarro missed.
Maybe so.
As you continue your body language journey, here's something to think about. What are some of the nonverbal cues that you find particularly revealing in your own interactions? Which gestures or expressions do you find most telling? Keep observing, keep questioning, and most importantly, keep learning. The world of nonverbal communication is full of endless possibilities for discovery.